Welcome back to part 2 of our FPS tutorial. We're now going to look at score systems, windscreens and main menus. To set a score up, we need to think about when a score should increase, in this case when an enemy is destroyed, and then we need some way of recording that information and having that display on screen. So what we need to do here is to consider how our score is going to be incremented. What we need is some game object in our scene to store that information. Usually, so I'm going to right click in the hierarchy here and I'm going to create an empty. The other way you can do this is to go to game object and create empty. It does exactly the same thing. This is an empty game object and it just has a transform component. That's all it has. But what I'm going to do is give this a name. Again, if you've clicked off, you can right click on your game object and rename it. And the name I'm going to give this is Game Controller, just so it stands out. Sometimes what I like to do, because a game controller just stores information about the state of the game, I like to change its name even more. I tend to put a dash on either end, just so it really stands out. Doesn't do anything different, just stands out. We're going to write a script for our game controller that we're also going to call something similar. Before we get to that stage though, we're going to set up some tags for our game controller so it's going to be useful later on. You'll notice that there's under the tag section already one that pre-exists called game controller. All templates already have this already in there, so I'm going to choose game controller just because that's going to help us out a little bit later on. We now want to write a script for our game controller that stores information about score. So I'm going to add a component and I want to create a new script called score with a capital S. New script, create an add. Again, Visual Studio will try really hard to open it up but fail. Again, what you can do is right click in this space and create a new C# script. It does exactly the same job. Just don't forget to attach it to your object, which is what we deliberately missed out for our cubes earlier when we added the health in part 1. So we've got this script now, which is our score script, which is on our game controller. Our game controller though is invisible. It's just an empty game object. It doesn't draw, it doesn't display anything. What I like to do to make game controllers stand out, though you won't see it in game, is you can choose the little icon next to game controller and choose an icon to help it stand out. So you can see it's now represented by a little coloured diamond or a different shape. I kind of like something green so it stands out. What I also like to do is to reset the transform of this object to 0, 0, 0, so you know it's always in the middle of your world. Doesn't impact your player, even though it's directly under your player's feet. Doesn't bother them, it's just there. So we've got our score script. Just as before, I'm going to double click on the greyed out word score, or you can double click here in the asset space. It takes you exactly the same place. It will open in Visual Studio. Just like before with our health system, we don't care about our start or our update functions, so let's delete them. What we do care about though is how much our current score is. So we're going to create a publicly accessible variable. It's going to be a whole number. You guys hopefully are seeing a pattern here at this stage, and we're going to call it something to do with score. Just like I said before though, you can't have the same name as you do for your class. So if I call that score, that's going to be very unhappy with me. So what we're going to do instead is just call it current score. Notice the lowercase c, uppercase s for current score. What is our initial score? Well, it starts life at 0. We give it an initial value of 0. It is initialized with the value of 0. What we also then need is a method that is called to increase our score. So let's have, just like we did with our health script where you could see public void take damage, well, we need something to do with adding some score that is public and doesn't return anything. Public void add score. Well, that'll do. Open close regular brackets, open close squiggly brackets, and again move left to give you a bit of space to go into add score. Every time we add score, just like we were doing with health, where health was taking 1 away, score is going to add 1. So I'm going to take the current score and add 1 to it. So I can go plus equals 1, which is exactly like what we were doing health, where we're doing minus equals 1. But the shortcut for doing this, if ever you're just incrementing by 1, is just plus plus. If ever you want to take away, you can do minus minus. So I'm just going to do plus plus and then semicolon to say that I'm done. That will add 1 to the current score. It's a bit of shorthand for doing that. Once we've added 1 to our current score, the next thing we're going to do is to check, was that enough to win the game? Assuming that the player has a certain number of score they need to achieve to win the game, maybe it's defeat 3 enemies, so you need a score of 3. So in order to have this work, we need to know what the win score is, the max score, whatever it is. So just under where we got current score, I'm now going to create a public int for max score, which I'm going to set as an initial value to 3. Once we've reached 3, we want to be able to win the game. So once our score has gone up by 1, what we now want to say is if our current score is equal to, notice again 2 equals one after the other, if our current score is equal to our max score, well, good stuff has happened, well done. Open and close open and close squigglies, and then in the squigglies let's just put a little message to say something has won. So inside of there we're going to do a debug.log message, notice capital D, capital L, and then in regular brackets, in double quotes, a message to inform the player they have won. You are winner. End of the line, semicolon, to say that you are done. Let's see if we are winner, shall we guys? So we need a score of 3. So we've got a current score of 0, you can see that. I've got the game controller object selected, I've got a current score of 0, got a max score of 3. Let's see what happens when I go and shoot the enemies, and pause now if you think you can see a problem. So if I shoot this enemy, okay, current score's not gone up. I shoot that one, nothing's gone up. Nothing's gone up. Oh, that's funny. Well, it's not funny at all, because we knew that every time something is destroyed, we just destroy it. Nowhere are we telling score to go up. We've got the bit of script ready to do it, but nothing is saying go and add to the score. So what we're going to do is in our health script, as well as destroying the game object, and if health scripts close down or you shoot script, remember you can go back into Unity and double click on them to open them back up in Visual Studio. Once we've destroyed our game object, once the enemy has destroyed itself, what we now need to say is, okay, go and add a point of score. But to do that we need to find the object that's holding our score. I'm going to use game object, this time with a capital G, dot find game object with tag. Notice there are two that are very similar. Find game objects with tag with the S is wrong. We want to find one game object singular. That one will return 1. Game objects with tag will return every one it can find, and we don't want that. Find game object with tag. And if you remember, we created a tag earlier, we chose a tag for our game object called game controller. Really important as well you check your spellings, because I'm prone to make typos. Game controller, uppercase G, uppercase C, looks about right. It'll tell me in a second if it isn't. So we're going to find the game controller. Once we have found the game controller, we can now get a component that the game controller has on it. Now the game controller only has 2 components, a transform and a score. So the component that we want in the angle brackets is score. Then we can tell score to do something. So hopefully you can see the way that this is chaining. That's a thing that is doing a thing that is getting an answer, that is doing a thing that is getting an answer, that can now do something. Now if you remember, get component has that open and close angle bracket, then it has that open and close regular parentheses. Then we can say dot. Here's all the things we can do to score, and we created a function that was called add score, if you remember. So add add score, then open and close brackets, semicolon to say that you're done. That's quite a long line of code. They do get bigger than that, but hopefully you can see it's no more complicated than working down the chain. Find a game object with a tag of game controller, there should only be one in the scene. Find the score component on that object, and then call the add score method, which is this bit here. As always, get used to hearing me say, always test, never trust. So when we destroy an object, does score go up by 1? Yes. Looking good? Looking good. What you will now see if I go into the console is I've got a little icon here. I don't see any messages, nothing's appeared, which is strange, but by default these little debug messages are not visible. So click on the little icon and you can hopefully see that you are winner. Well done, winner, you've earned that message. However, what we want to do with our game is we don't actually want to just have a message display there because the player will never see it. We want to go to a different screen, a win screen. The way Unity manages different screens is all managed in the scenes folder, and you will see there's a scene called Playground, and if you look at the top left hand corner of your Unity project, FPS Demo in my case is the name of the project, Playground is the name of the currently open scene. So we can see that that is the currently open scene. I now want to right click anywhere in the grey space and to create a new scene. There it is, just under Text Mesh Pro. This one I'm going to call Win with a capital W. In order for your scripts that we're going to use to transition between scenes, these must be set up in what's called the Scene Manager. So to do that, you go to File and Build Settings, and you'll see that Playground is in your project, it's in your scene, but we also want Win to be in there as well. So you can drag and drop Win. So currently what this means is Playground will be the scene that loads first, and then Win will load second. Makes sense? You don't want to go straight to the Win screen, but if you do need to change your order, you can click and drag and move around, but we want Playground to go first. You can double click on the Win scene. That will take you to an empty scene. It looks like all your work has been deleted, it looks like everything's gone, everything's deleted out of the hierarchy. It hasn't. You can double click back on Playground, it's just taken you to your Win scene, which currently has nothing in it. Because we're dealing just with 2D and user interface here, we can click the 2D button here, which is next to the light bulb, and that will then go in 2D mode. We can go to Game Object, UI for user interface, and a piece of text that uses Text Mesh Pro. So I'm going to choose that. The first time you do this, you have to import Text Mesh Pro Essentials, and once you've done that for the first time in a project, you don't need to do it again. You have to zoom and 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 zoom, and then when you think you're done zooming, zoom some more. And also what you will now find at this point is the resolution of your monitor is represented by this white rectangle. But your monitor isn't that size and shape, you know, it's not really long and thin, it's actually 16 by 9, that's the aspect ratio of your monitor. But it actually changes it to scale to whatever your scene view is here. So if you want to force it to be 16 by 9, go into the game window and change the word free aspect to be 16 by 9. What you can also see is our new text is poking off screen, because in the scene window you can see that this rectangle represents your screen and new text is currently poking off of the side of it. The tools that we use here, you've got the regular move tool, but now we're dealing with UI, this tool, the rect tool, is the most useful thing to do, and it should default to that, because that lets you snap to the centre of your screen, and it allows you to move things around quite nicely. I'm going to zoom in using the middle mouse. So we've got our new text, which is currently white, but I'm going to change the vertex colour so it stands out a bit better on the background. I'm going to make that be black. And I'm going to change the text to say winner, and I'm also going to centre align it just like you would do in Word. You've got some alignment tools, and you can change the font size, keeping in mind if it goes too big for the box it will go a bit wrong, just like a text box in Word. So make the text box a bit bigger, realign it so it's in the middle. There you go, smack bang in the middle, you are a winner. If I press play now, it will go straight into the win scene because that's the one that's open, and you will see what it will look like if you go to the screen where you've won. You get a big message that says winner, well done, check that that works. But I want to go back to my playground and have it say, well, if I've won the game, if I've got the maximum score, go to the win screen, if you go back to playground, you'll go, oh, where's my project gone? It's all gone horribly wrong. Because you're still in 2D mode, it remembers your settings between scenes. So I have to go back in 2D mode and you will be really, really far away. So you can double click on your main camera or your player capsule and that will just take you back into the scene. So you're not lost. So we don't actually need to do anything in this scene because the scene's ready to go. We just need to change our script. Every time our score goes up, currently we're saying you are winner, but what we now need to say is tell the scene manager to transition between scenes. To do this, we need to be using an additional line of code. So at the top, underneath using Unity Engine, we're also going to be using Unity Engine .scene management, semicolon, to say that you're done. Now we don't want to say you are winner. We're going to replace that with scene manager dot load scene, capital L, capital S, and then in regular brackets the name of the scene you want to load. If you were to rename your scene now, this would break because it's dependent on the name you gave it. It's always important to name scenes when you create them. It makes your life a little bit easier. So we've got load scene and we've got win. If I go back into the game now and play it, I'm currently in the playground scene, make sure you are as well. I walk over here, I shoot one, score should go up, I can click the game controller to score go up, yes. I shoot this one twice, score goes up, I shoot this one 3 times, takes me immediately to the win screen. You've just won your game, outstanding, well done, pat on the back. Final thing we wanted to do to make this a complete experience is to make that into a main menu. So we have a score system that is working, we have a win screen that is working, and we want a main menu to allow us to go through our game now. And then your project is done for the day. In order to create a win screen, exactly the same way we did before, so if you're not in your scenes folder, go into your scenes folder, right click and create a new scene. If you can figure out where I'm going with this, jump ahead, but we're going to call this new scene something along the lines of main menu, all one word with no spaces, pressing enter, double clicking into our main menu, going back to 2D mode and zooming out and out and out and out. I want to create a game object that is user interface, but this time instead of using a piece of text that is TextMesh Pro, this time we're going to use a button that is TextMesh Pro. Buttons, rather unsurprisingly, are interactive. There we have our 16:9 aspect ratio space again. We have a button that we can resize. We can change its colour. We can change the text on it, but you'll find there's no way of changing the text on the button because the button is a composite component. It is a parent to a child, which is a text object. So if you want to change the text, you've got to open up the button, go into the text, and then you can find the text just like we edited for our win text a moment ago. So I'm going to have this say play game. I'm going to change the font size. I'm going to make it bold. I'm going to make this button slightly less obnoxious, but notice if I'm changing the size of it, I've got the text selected right now, so I'm just changing the text box. I want to change the size of the button that will also change the text box because it is a child of it. If you wanted to, you could also create a piece of text running across the top, the name of the game or whatever you wanted, but that's an exercise for you to do. To make this button do something, we have to tell the button component. Notice we've got a rect transform component, unlike the regular transform component we saw, an image component, a button component. What we need to do is to say on click what happens. We're going to write a bit of script that says when this is clicked, change scenes. I've just shown you how we change scenes. So what we have to do is think about where the script is going to live and how it's going to attach to our button. So if I click back on our canvas, I like to put all of this script on the canvas object. So the button needs to have access to it, so I tend to put it on the canvas. It means if you've got many buttons, you can just have one script that will have a button that will take you to your credits, one that will take you to the game, one that will take you to the lose screen, one that will take you to your high score table. You can put all of that script as many functions inside of the canvas. So let me show you what that means. We're going to add a new component, and we're going to call this new component something along the lines of menu, M-E-N-U capital M. We're going to make a new script, we're going to create an add. Just as before, double click on the grey space, or in the asset space you can find the script to open it in Visual Studio. Again, we don't need any of this bobbins, but what we do need is to be using Unity Engine scene management exactly like we did a moment ago, and then what we need to do is to have a method. Sometimes I'll call them a method, sometimes I'll call them a function. I do mean method every time. It's a chunk of code that something else can call. To make it so it's something else can call it is public. It is void because it doesn't return anything. Hopefully you're seeing the patterns. They're all public, they're all void, and then you've got the name of what you want to call it. In this case we're going to call it load main game. Open and close regular brackets, open and close squiggly brackets, and I'm just going to tidy that up. What we then want to say is, well, what happens when we load the main game? Well, just as we did before, tell the scene manager to load a scene, and that scene will be called something. What we need to do is to go back into our game and go, well, what is our main scene called? I've forgotten. It was called Playground with a capital P. So it's got to be called Playground, G-R-O-U-N-D, with a capital P. So when this function, I mean method by that, when this method is called, load the playground scene, that will work. There is one final step that we are missing, which is to tell the button that its job is to call that function method that we just wrote. On click, press the little plus arrow, and this is quite difficult to follow along with. Add to the list. You then drag into that slot the object that contains the script, in this case the canvas. Notice that if I left click on the canvas, that will disappear. What you have to do is with your button selected, make sure that's visible. You don't left click, you click and drag. I'm going to click and drag into the word none, and then I can choose a function which I will find on the script that we wrote, which was called menu, and the function that we called was called load main game. So I'm going to choose load main game. That button should now call that script where it loads the main game and loads the playground scene. Before we do that, we have to make sure that our final main menu is in our file and build settings and in an order that we want. So main menu should live at the top. So I'm just going to drag that to the top of our list. Our main menu loads first, followed by our level, followed by our win screen. That is a sensible order. If I press play, let's see if it works, because you always test, you never trust. There's our play game button with its obnoxious yellow. I press play. Does it start the game? Yes, it does. 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot. You are winner. Congratulations, guys. Give yourself a big round of applause. You've made yourself a complete working experience. Well done.